In the same year, 2013, maybe stretching into 2014, another case surfaced, and this one had all the hallmarks of something more sinister. They called it the Hidden Demon Forest, a place steeped in mystery and death. It wasn't the first time strange things had happened in that forest, but this case would solidify its reputation as one of the most dangerous places in North America. Sure, when you think of forests with the highest number of disappearances or deaths, Yosemite National Park in California usually comes to mind. It's a vast, heavily trafficked area, where accidents and disappearances are all too common. But Yosemite, whose name in the local Native American language means, "they will kill you," pales in comparison to the Nahana'ing Valley. The Nahana'ing Valley is located in a vast area of rainforest in northern Canada, bordering Alaska. It covers an area of 1.1 million square kilometers, equivalent to the rest of the country. It is so remote that it feels like you have traveled back in time 100,000 years ago. Only 45,000 people live on the edge of the forest, scattered in the shadow of a vast forest. The rumors about Nahana'ing Valley began during the gold rush, about 100 years ago. For young prospectors ventured into the heart of the forest and struck gold near the headwaters. Their fortune seemed assured, but as they tried to return, their boat capsized in the rushing river, the gold lost beneath the water. Luck was on their side that day, and they survived, barely. The next year, they decided to return, but this time only 3 of the original group dared to enter the forest. Months passed, and their families and friends began to worry. They should have returned by now. A search party was assembled, venturing into the deep woods, hoping to find some sign of the missing men. What they discovered chilled everyone to the bone. The camp was deserted, and worse, the 3 men had been slaughtered. Their bodies were headless. But the most disturbing detail? Their heads were not cut off with swords, but twisted from their bodies, twisted, torn by superhuman force. Rumors did not stop others from seeking the gold, and that greed often overshadowed common sense. Hundreds more people poured into the valley, chasing the promise of riches. Many never returned, and those who did return told tales of bodies found in even stranger conditions. Some had dynamite strapped to their waists and had blown themselves up. Others had frozen to death while standing, arms outstretched, as if reaching for something beyond their grasp. After hundreds of deaths and disappearances, the Canadian government stepped in. They blew up the bridges, destroyed the roads leading into Nahana'ing Valley, and effectively sealed off the forest from anyone foolish enough to venture inside. Or so they said. According to local conspiracy theories, the government wasn't trying to stop people from entering the forest, they were trying to keep something inside. Something inhuman, lurking in the depths of that ancient wilderness. And that brings us to the case of Frederick and David, 2 American hunters who didn't believe in the legends. In 2013, despite the government's efforts to cut off access to the valley, they found a way in. With no roads left, there were only 2 options for entering the forest: either row a boat upriver, or hire a small plane to drop you off at a lake in the middle of the wilderness. Frederick and David chose the latter. They hired a seaplane to land them at a remote lake, deep in the heart of Nahana'ing Valley. Their plan was simple: they'd spend 10 days hunting bears, staying in an old prospector's cabin they'd heard about. It was the same cabin used by gold miners a century ago. They came prepared with enough food, guns, and supplies to last 2 weeks, and they were excited for what they believed would be the adventure of a lifetime. In the heart of a vast, dense forest, the first World Heritage Forest ever certified by UNESCO, there stood a lone hut. It was an odd sight, and many people wondered how it came to be there, deep within protected land. But there was an explanation. According to the law, if someone built a hut and marked their land before the government declared the area a national park, the land became privately owned, even though it was now surrounded by wilderness. David and Frederick had made an agreement with a pilot who would pick them up in 10 days at a nearby riverside location. The pilot agreed and said he would return at the agreed time. 10 days passed, and true to his word, the pilot flew back to the designated spot. But something was off. David and Frederick were nowhere to be seen, even though they should have been waiting by the river. Concerned, the pilot landed his plane, tied it up by the shore, and made his way to the hut. What he found there was nothing short of a nightmare. The clearing around the hut looked like a battlefield. Trees were scarred, debris was scattered, and the hut's door, oddly enough, was locked from the outside. When the pilot managed to pry it open and look inside, he was met with an even more disturbing scene. The interior was in shambles, furniture overturned, belongings strewn everywhere. It was as if a fierce struggle had taken place. Something terrible had happened here. Panicked, the pilot rushed back to his plane and flew straight to the nearest police station, a staggering 700 kilometers away. Soon after, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police organized a search team to comb through the forest, but after days of searching, they came up empty-handed. The men were missing, their fate unknown. Eventually, the police ruled it a standard missing persons case and closed the file. However, David and Frederick's family were not satisfied with the police's explanation. They were rich and influential, and they did not want their son's disappearance to be a mystery. So they hired a private investigator from the United States along with an experienced tracking team to head into the forest and find the truth. After days of searching the dangerous area, the bodies of David and Frederick were found 16 kilometers apart. David fled into the mountains, while Frederick was found in a river south of the cabin. Drowning was not the cause of Frederick's death. An autopsy found that Frederick's lungs were dry. He had died before entering the water, likely due to hypothermia. Authorities called the incident an unfortunate accident, as both men had died from the brutal cold of the jungle. The case was thus terminated. But the private investigators weren't convinced. Something didn't add up. David's body showed signs of severe burns on his palms, and the scene at the hut raised far too many questions. Why was there a fire inside the hut? What had caused the bullet holes riddling the walls, and why was the door locked from the outside? As the detectives pieced together the evidence, questions began to arise in their minds. They theorized that something or someone had tried to break into the cabin the night before the men left. Whatever it was, it had destroyed the chimney, causing the stove inside to collapse and starting a fire. David tried desperately to put out the fire, but his hand was burned. Meanwhile, Frederick fought back against the intruders, firing bullets frantically in the dark. But strangely, there was no blood or sign of any life, human or otherwise, having been shot. With the stove destroyed, David and Frederick could no longer stay in the cabin. If they lit a fire to stay warm, the smoke would suffocate them while they slept. So, in a last-ditch effort to survive the cold night, they went outside, hoping to build a large fire in an open area. But the forest was damp, cold, and making fires in such conditions was nearly impossible. David tossed what little fuel they had left onto the weak flames. For a moment, it flared up, illuminating the surrounding trees, casting long, flickering shadows that danced in the night. Soon the flames died down. The fire outside had turned to charcoal, putting them at risk. The rustling, the sound of footsteps through the woods, the sound of approaching, whatever had tried to enter the cabin before, was back. The first attack came swiftly. Frederick grabbed the rifle, firing wildly into the darkness. Bullet casings clattered onto the wooden floor, but whatever it was, it didn't stop. It came at them relentlessly, tearing through the trees, crashing against the cabin walls. David and Frederick tried their best to fight back, but this time it wasn't enough. They retreated into the cabin, slamming the door, hoping the walls would protect them, and began loading ammunition. But the thing came after them, blasting the chimney through the roof. In a panic, David and Frederick ran away. Before they ran away, they locked the creature inside by locking the cabin door from the outside, hoping this would buy them some time, but it was freezing outside. As the fire went out and the wind blew through the trees, the temperature dropped dangerously. The two men ran in different directions, trying to survive the terror that was chasing them. So, the private investigators and the tracking team hired by David and Frederick's family came to a reasonable conclusion. Why would a man carrying a gun, supplies, a hut, a fire, and everything else he needed to survive for half a month run and die 16 kilometers away from the hut? As the detectives pieced together their final moments, a terrifying thought occurred to them: whatever they had locked in the cabin, it was still there. The woods were full of secrets, and no one could tell for sure what was hunting David and Frederick. But one thing was clear: something dangerous lived in the woods. Local legends, whispered among those who dared to venture near the forest, spoke of an ancient presence, a creature bound to the land. Some believed it was a demon, a guardian of the forest's boundaries, tied to the old world's curses and superstitions. They said it hunted those who crossed its path, but only within a certain reach. Beyond the cliffs, beyond the river, it had no power. Maybe it was that, or maybe it was something worse, something no one had ever truly seen. But one thing is certain: the forest does not give up its dead easily. And if you find yourself lost in those woods, you'd better hope whatever's out there doesn't find you first. Because if it does, no fire, no gun, and no amount of running will save you.